Pete Eberle with the Colorado Renewable Energy Society. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And before we jump into the DER discussion on how DERs can help manage the grid, I do have a couple of quick announcements. First of all, just on upcoming CRESS events, on Thursday, March 31st, we will have Geothermal's Low Carbon Energy Solutions with Dr. Amanda Kolker of Eberle. That'll be from 7 to 9 p.m. at the Jefferson Unitarian Church in Golden, Colorado. That will be an in-person event, but there will be a webcast. So you can get that webcast by registering through the website at crest-energy.org/events. Coming up on Tuesday, April 26th, we will have Mike Murray, the CEO of Agito Energy, talk about their microgrid work. That'll be from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Innisphere in Fort Collins, Colorado. There's a possibility of a webcast, but I don't have one planned right now. That'll be our first in-person event up here in Northern Colorado in a while. So hopefully you all can join us. There will be additional details once I get the meetup made. We're still finalizing the program there. So if you're on our list, you will get the notification. And lastly, we have a climate change in the ski industry with Geraldine Link of the National Ski Area Association. That'll be Thursday, May 19th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. And that will be a webinar. So you will also be able to register for that through crest-energy.org/events. And before jumping into introducing our first speaker, I do want to thank our Northern Colorado business members who help support our organization. And those would include Platte River Power Authority, Poudre Valley Rural Electric Association, Benchmark Electrical Solutions, Sandbox Solar, and Solaris Energy. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Wesley Cravens of NLX.
NLX is a global utility. We've been around since the 60s and are based in Rome, Italy. We're one of the largest power generation companies in the world. We have over 100 gigawatts worth of operating capacity, almost half of which is in the renewable space. We operate in 31 countries, thousands of employees. But our major business lines in NLX are demand response, energy management, and mobility, which is my specific group. Next slide. NLX e-mobility, we have over 250,000 charge points globally. I believe we have about 100,000 here in the U.S. Most of the U.S. is residential based. Our juice box charger is one of the #1 chargers in the residential space. And we also do have commercial and level 3 or ECFC. We have 6.3 gigawatts worth of demand response globally, 123 megawatts of installed storage, and 90,000 utility managed bills. So, next slide. For our e-mobility group, we do grid services, which is supporting the grid through demand response programs. We also do data storage, EV smart facilities, fleet management, C&I customers, and residential. We also can operate as a CPO or a charge point operator, where we actually own and operate our assets. And we are also the largest electric bus fleet management company in the world, and have the largest bus depot, electric charging depot in the world, down in South America. That's managed through our e-cities group, not through the e-mobility group. And then we also have an e-industries group that handles battery storage projects and does demand response through those projects. In New York City, I believe we have the first and largest battery storage project in the Con Ed territory. It's pretty interesting. I didn't talk about it here, but it would be worth looking up. Next slide. So this slide is a little outdated with the 170,000 ports globally. We do have 250, like I said. We've completed over 13 million charging sessions. And we actually have, and this is one of the main topics that I'd like to discuss today, is a 70 megawatt virtual battery in California. We operate on the wholesale energy market, and through utility run demand response programs, we actually can operate the chargers as a virtual battery. Now we don't deliver power back to the grid in a V2G situation. We're still in the V1G or vehicle to grid, not vehicle to grid, but vehicle grid integration. And we can actually curtail all the chargers out there in the program to provide demand response for utilities. Then we provide the money that's generated through that program is given back to the end users who have these in their homes or at their businesses. And that is through a energy credit through the utilities that are providing or calling for the demand response. Pretty interesting. Got a lot of participants, and it's been a very, very good program, and it's across multiple utilities throughout California. So next slide. And then alternatively, we have a project in Hawaii where we actually do the opposite. Instead of turning the chargers off at a high demand time during the day, we actually, let me step back a second, because Hawaii has one of the largest solar penetration in the country. And because they're isolated island, in the afternoon on a very sunny day, they have more solar than they can deploy the energy to the loads. So we developed a program with them, with Hawaii Electric or ECO, to actually turn on chargers at these high demand times or high solar demand times to help lessen the load on the, or help increase the load on the grid. So this has been a very, very successful project. And in fact, it was one of the projects that made Hawaii Electric or ECO Utility of the Year, I believe it was last year. So very interesting project. I don't have a whole lot of time here to talk about it, but I really would suggest you go out and look at it because it has been very successful. So I'm going to open this up now to see if anybody has any questions on Peter. Can you, I don't believe I can see the questions panel, but I'd be more than happy to answer anything.
Okay, yeah, there's a couple questions here. Please define demand response.
Please define demand response. So demand response is when a utility has, so on the wholesale energy market, different types of power have different costs. So natural gas has a cost, wind energy has a cost, solar has a cost, and they're all contributing to the load generation or the power generation for any specific area. So sometimes a load will be too high and you don't have enough of those generating sources to provide the energy to the load. So in a demand response type of situation, you would go out to like internet edge devices like EV chargers in our instance, or air conditionings is one, furnaces is another. There's a number of different loads throughout the house that a utility may or may not have access to, depending on if you've signed into the program. In this instance, they would go out and decrease the demand of the load at the user level in order to lower the price of energy, or not have to turn on their spinning reserves, which could be very, very expensive.
Okay. And then the follow-up question is, what is EVSE?
EVSE is electric vehicle supply equipment, and it just is any type of electric vehicle charger.
Okay. Okay, any other questions for Wesley before we move on to Jon? Nope. Oh, I do have one here. Was there anything that surprised you in the way EV owners interacted with their chargers in Hawaii? E.g., how did they respond to the managed charging?
So most EV drivers nowadays are very forward-thinking people. They're into renewable energy, they're into solar. That's the reason why most people drive EVs. So I was actually surprised that they actually will want to utilize like time of use programs where the utility will set the charger to only charge at nighttime when the load is the least and the electricity cost is the least. Granted, that is the time that the usual person dwells, but for the most part, I was very surprised that nearly everyone participates in the time of use programs through utilities. And I think that'll go away as the EV market picks up and you have more pickup trucks and those types of vehicles out there. I think that'll go away, but it did surprise me that so many people are willing to forego convenience, I guess, to better the world.
Okay, two quick additional questions, and I'm going to clip it off here so we can move along because we've got a lot more to cover still. And just a question on explain VTG, vehicle to grid.
Yeah, so vehicle to grid is it's actually deploying energy back to the grid, just like a solar inverter would push power back to the grid from your house. We can do the same thing. There's vehicle to grid, there's vehicle to home, there's vehicle to building. So those are all terms within the EV industry. It does require special equipment because now that charger needs to be certified to deliver power back to the grid. So there is another component, which is V1G, which is sort of a bad name because it was developed after V2G. But that's just discussing smart charging and having connectivity to the charger and be able to manipulate that charger to help provide demand response.
Okay, great. And last one, how many megawatts can be managed with the HECO EV program?
I think it's not at the, right now we're in a trial period, and it's sort of a test bed program to see how this type of thing works. There's 300 chargers in the program. I think they're all 10 kW each. So that's about 3 megawatts.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Wesley. Let's go ahead and hand it over to Jon. And let me get you queued up here, Jon.
Okay, great.
Oh, can I talk about that real quick?
Oh,
Sorry, I forgot about it. But we do have a program called JuiceNet Green. And because we're following the wholesale energy market and we know what different kinds of power generation is happening at any one time, we can tell when renewables are at their peakest in your area. You can sign up for JuiceNet Green and your charger will only work during the times where the renewables are higher than the more traditional types of power generation.
okay. Very good. Okay. Well, let's, all right, off to you, Jon.
Okay, great. So I just have this. Oh, your presentation went away. There it goes. So I just have this one slide. So I'm going to talk through a couple different programs. But first, so I'm Jon Grooters, Director of Strategic Accounts at Generac Grid Services, which is obviously a division within Generac. We were newly formed back in September of last year, and primarily it was through the acquisition of the company that I worked previously that was acquired by Generac, which is Eberle, which is a software technology that can aggregate many behind-the-meter devices like we're talking about today and offer them as grid services. So we were acquired by Generac at the end October of 2020, and then created Generac Grid Services September of 2021. And really the reason for the brand, the rebranding is we truly can now offer full turnkey bundled solutions, both hardware, software, and services to really accelerate or help utilities achieve some of these objectives that we're talking about today. So with that, I wanted to highlight a couple different really successful programs that are helping DERs manage the grid. One of them is a behind the meter, that's what the BTM, behind the meter. And it's a bring your own battery program in New England, specifically in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So what that means is customers, end users that have any sort of well, I shouldn't say any sort of, there's several vendors that have been approved by the utilities to participate in this program. The Generac battery storage is one of those vendors, but if a customer owns battery storage in these areas, they can choose to participate in the program. It's fully voluntary and the asset is owned by that end user, but there is incentive payments for performance for allowing the utilities to schedule those assets during critical times. So like everything, like when we start to talk about aggregation, any one of these is not going to do a lot for the grid, but you start to aggregate and orchestrate them, during key times, and now you really have something that can really help the grid during some key times of congestion. So the utilities involved mainly are National Grid and Eversource. Again, it's in Massachusetts and in Rhode Island. And just to give you an idea of the incentives, there's certainly some of the richest incentives of a battery program in the United States. For Massachusetts, they have both a summer and a winter program. Their summer program pays out at $225 per kilowatt, and their winter pays out at $50 per kilowatt. So what that means is the average output during those events. So if you just do, a quick, some quick math during, if a customer can average 5 kilowatts during those events through the summer and winter seasons, that's going to average about $1,375 per year. So you really can start to really monetize these assets. And then on the flip side for the utility, having these can offset, some capital improvements, some capital investments, maybe offset some, peaker generation. There's a lot of ways that these can be leveraged. So that was in Massachusetts. Rhode Island actually has even a more lucrative incentive payment. They only do summer months. In the summer, it's between June and September is when they run them. Between 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. is when they can call events. And the Rhode Island one actually pays $400 per kilowatt. So you really do start to see customers really starting to pay off these, investments a lot quicker using this. They can in both states, during the summer months, they can be called 60 times during the summer months. And for Massachusetts, that also has a winter program, they can only be called up to 5 times. So there is a limitation and a threshold of how often the utilities can call on them. And each event can only be a max duration of 3 hours. Just to give you kind of some ideas of what these events look like. And the final thing I will say on that is they also won't call. They are very. They understand that a lot of customers have these for resiliency time periods. So if there is, weather upcoming, they won't call on them at those key times so that they can have a full charge. But there is a limit of state of charge. I don't believe they can drain the batteries below either 30% or 20%. I think it actually that threshold may have just changed, but there is a threshold that the utility will not drain a battery beyond that, so that there always will be some backup capabilities no matter what's going on in the grid. So that is the behind the meter battery storage. Transitioning over to a different type of DER that can also be greatly leveraged by utilities for managing the grid is customer and industrial load management programs. And the specific program that I'm going to talk to you is about Public Service in New Mexico, or PNM, where they are leveraging both HVAC control and process flexibility at their C&I facilities to, again, reduce load during those high demand events. So the program is called Peak Saver. It has been ongoing since 2008, and it has grown to over 30 megawatts now, which includes 40 different C&I customers. And within that group of 40 customers, it's actually expanded to over 150 different sites. So the customers, some of the requirements, the customers have to have a minimum 50 kilowatt peak demand for them to enroll. And this is also a summer only event. PNM is a summer peaking utility. So it is between June and September, and they can call events between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. And a couple logistics, PNM will give the customer minimum of 10 minutes, but most of the time the events are called where you can give the customer hours to be able to know that a event is coming, and then the duration is maximum of 4 hours. Now, so how they recruit, how they bring these C&I customers into the fold. It's obviously a voluntary program with an incentive payment structure to the participants. So they market the program. Interested C&I customers will, put in their request, and typically they're, PNM first looks at the metering data to see what the curtailment ability is, and maybe potentially strategy as far as times that they could offer, a load reduction. Then typically there is a site survey. Our team wants to understand what are those processes, where can maximum load reduction without causing too much disruption or any disruption sometimes to any processes or anything in place. It can be an automated or a manual reduction. So what I mean by that is oftentimes we can be automated directly into their energy management system or their HVAC system. Or it could be as simple as there's some that are just a manual where they receive an email notification that, they know their processes, they know how they can achieve certain thresholds, and they will manually make the adjustments for that. There is a after the events, after the season is concluded, there's a measurement and verification of performance to make sure that all the incentive payments are handled accordingly. And then there is obviously these customers can withdraw of any event that's being called if it's going to hinder or if it's going to if there's any operational constraints that they will not be able to meet. So with that, I will open it up for any questions.
Is the future control of devices by utilities or third parties, such as, this might actually be more to Wesley, parties such as an LX, or will it be more indirect, such as time of use or real-time pricing? How do you see this evolving?
So I can, yeah, go ahead, Wesley.
I was just going to say that from our standpoint, I see it moving towards aggregators, third-party aggregators that will collect all the different devices and help manage that. I don't think it'll be more, the time of use is called a static program. I think it'll be more dynamic.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I do think that these programs will get more complex, and we will start to see more automation, and customers will start to realize that, because there's a benefit. We run a program in Australia that's very progressive with DER management, and there is a big shift in if your availability is within seconds as opposed to minutes. So the more granularity and the quicker you can respond, which typically then means more of an automated approach, there is a lot more value for that quick response. So I do think that we will start to see more automation.
Okay, for these BTM programs, where are you and the utilities in terms of getting solar battery installers up to speed and capable of selling this option to customers who are buying their own batteries they will install for them? Crucially, are they able to reflect the payments for utility called events into the ROI calculations that the solar installers love to do for potential customers?
So that's a great question, and it's certainly a barrier for a lot of these programs is education of the installers, because you really you're dependent on them understanding what those incentive payments can be and how that can help basically finance these investments. So I would say for Connected Solutions out in New England, they've done a really good job of education. Some other battery storage programs that we are participating in, it is a challenge. You do need to make it worth it to not only the homeowner but also to the installer. Everybody has to kind of win and understand what the performance of those incentives are.
Okay. How is the C&I load management program different from Excel's program, where they give you some kind of rebate if you let them control your AC under certain conditions?
So I'm sure that there's a lot of similarities. We aren't directly involved with the Excel program. So I do know that there's certainly some similarities. I can't comment specifically on what all Excel is doing and what their performance incentives are. But yeah, I would venture to say, yeah, what they're doing in P&M is certainly not completely unique. It's just been it's been a very successful and growing C&I demand response program.
Okay. What was the megawatt of load managed offered by each program approximately?
So the C&I load management that's surpassed 30 megawatts, and I tried to get an updated on the connected solutions, and I don't have it. I know it's above 40 megawatts at this point, but I don't have the latest on that, because that is a program that has multiple vendors. So in aggregation of all the different vendors, it's pretty substantial.
Okay. For PNM, what benefits do the companies participating receive?
So they get a performance incentive, and I don't have the dollar per kilowatt, but it is a dollar per kilowatt. So when the events are called, if they don't opt out, and if, depending on how many, kilowatts or megawatts they can deliver during those events, those are then measured throughout the season, and they look at that performance, and then it is a cash incentive payment at the end of the season to those customers.
Okay. How do you see the utilities' willingness to allow cloud-based data integration into their EMSs? How do you solve the data integration challenge?
So, I mean, we are a cloud-based. Most of our solutions are a software as a service solution. So, we certainly are seeing utilities being much more open to allowing that. And I'm not sure as far as the data, to the EMS. So I don't know if what they're getting at. So what we typically do and I assume that was for the PNM C&I load management. Most of those sites that we are tying directly into an energy management system, we place a gateway that actually does that integration to that site EMS. I'm not sure if that's what they were alluding to or not.
Okay. Can C&I customers integrate BTM self-generation for a more holistic approach?
Yes, yeah, generators are included in that program. So if they, obviously emissions, everything else, if all that's there, then they can, turn on-site generation, or if it's storage, they can absolutely use that in conjunction with any sort of load management process that can help offset, any sort of load.
Okay. Okay, two more questions, and then we're going to move on to Philip. Can you estimate what the battery owner earns per megawatt hour if the utility draws the maximum?
Oof, I don't know. I did go through, so like the one example, if you are averaging 5 kilowatts of output during, so even if so that even gives you a little bit. Most of those inverters are 7.6 kilowatts. So if you're averaging 5 kilowatts of output during both your summer and winter months in that Massachusetts program, you're going to get $1,300 a year, and then that's locked in for 5 years. So if as long as you're performing, you can get upwards, over $1,000 back each year for your performance. So.
Okay. Does Generac require use of your DERM solution, or can you provide the field services or recruitment and integrate it with an existing utility DERMS?
Yep, no, that's a great question. So even though, yes, we can offer a whole completely vertical integration, we absolutely know that it is a large ecosystem. And actually one of the biggest reasons why we created Generac Grid Services is so that we can work with both different head ends, so a different DERMS or demand response management system, as well as our DERMS platform, Concerto, can also work with anybody else's, in devices. It doesn't have to be a Generac branded device. So yes, good question. We absolutely do understand that there is a large ecosystem out there, and we are accommodating to that.
Okay, great. All right, well, appreciate it, John. Let's go ahead and hand the baton to Philip and talk about what Panasonic is up to.
Hey everybody, and thanks for that, John. I hope you can get Excel to have some of those battery programs that you have up there with National Grid or whoever it is, maybe EverSource. I'll buy one of your batteries for my house if you talk them into it. I think that's a pretty cool program you guys have. But yeah, like I said, my name is Philip Tucker. I work for Panasonic. I'm part of a small group called Next Lab. We say we work in the nexus of energy and mobility. But I live in Northern Colorado. I've lived here, I guess, like around 18 years, something like that. I started in the energy industry with Fort Collins Utilities. I was a key account manager there for a few years. So I might know some of you on the call. I can't see the list of who's here, but hopefully I've run into a few of you before. After Fort Collins Utilities, I got my MBA while I was there, transitioned over to Xcel Energy, where I became a program manager on their demand management team. And I had a big focus on electric vehicles in that group. Also some C&I programs, with traditional demand response type programs for them. So my focus for this time is to be talking about managed EV charging programs that I've worked on both at Xcel and with Panasonic. I will say, before going too far, I'll talk about the Xcel program. I helped, build the product and helped with the launch, but I am not there anymore, so I don't represent Xcel. I'll only be talking about information you could find publicly, so I'll just put that disclaimer out there. And these programs that I'm talking about are all what we would classify as active managed charging. So it's more of that actual control over the charging, rather than, I think there were some other conversations about static programs or passive programs that are more more behavioral in nature, where it's trying to get consumers to behave in a certain way, or in this circumstance, charge in a certain way that's beneficial for the grid, but that isn't actively managed by the utility. So we're focusing right now on the technology and what we're working with on the active managed charging side. So that'll be the focus here. Let's go to the next slide, Peter. So this is, just some eye candy from NREL. We all love data from NREL and the studies they've done. I think this is a few years old now, but it's probably a chart a lot of us have seen. This is a forecast of the impact of electric vehicle charging on the grid. And we're looking at some pretty major growth, which is obvious to us all, I think. But NREL was predicting, even a few years ago, that we'd see a 20 to 40% increase in demand on the grid just from electric vehicle charging, which is this monumental growth. As you know, load has been pretty flat for utilities for quite a while, and now we're seeing this big spike in demand coming up. And there's a lot of challenges with that. It's going to be expensive to upgrade the grid to be able to meet the needs for this new load that's coming on. But there's a lot of opportunities ahead for us too, if we can do this right, if we can manage charging in a smart way. And that's what we're really trying to get out in front of right now, is to take advantage of those opportunities. And so, there's a lot of good things for everybody in it. For utilities, they can see more revenue and energy sales through the transportation electrification. I think societally as a whole, we'll see some good benefits in terms of downward rate pressure that just comes from more energy sales that'll come through electric vehicles. And for our group specifically, it gives us an opportunity to integrate more intermittent generation, which means more renewables that we can put onto the grid, and we can use that energy in an efficient way. So that's why we're really pushing hard on this. It's pretty fun stuff to work on. I feel like it's something we can feel good about contributing to, and we're working in the right direction here on things. But it's also why pilots are so important. There's a lot for us to learn. There's a lot for utilities to figure out, just how to manage this new load before we get to that hockey stick, growth curve in the load. So anyway, I don't need to tell this group all of those reasons. I think everybody kind of knows what's going on here and how the grid is going to be impacted by this. So we can dive into some actual examples of how we're trying to test, DERs and how we can contribute to managing this load growth well. So next slide, Peter. The first project I wanted to talk about is one that I've been working on with Panasonic. We've been working with Portland General Electric, or PGE, and they have a site up there in Portland that's called the Electric Island. And they've built this site in partnership with Daimler, who also has their North American headquarters there in Portland. And it's a test site and a demo site to study heavy duty charging, like really heavy duty charging. They're looking at chargers of upwards of 1 megawatt, which is this massive load to have in one spot. And I would kind of be afraid to get close to that charger. That's so much energy going through there. But there's a lot for them to learn. So they built the site with them to understand the impacts of the grid. They're testing the various technologies that are available to them at the site too. So they have charging equipment, or EVSEs, a new term that we learned here, from various manufacturers from the US and foreign manufacturers too. So getting a lot of experience with all of these different technologies. And so they're trying to get it all there so they can see, what's the impact and how can we manage this well. And if we go to the next slide, Peter, that's really why they brought in Panasonic. And sorry, some of my text here is getting squished up a little bit, I think. But so they brought us in. We were doing some other work with them, and they were telling us about their site. And they asked us if we could, help them manage this project and get the maximum amount of value out of it. They had several chargers there. They showed us they were managing, I don't know, I think like 8 different dashboards for all of these different chargers. And so operationally, it just became kind of this mess when you have all this different equipment and they're all managed separately. It was becoming a difficult challenge for them. Additionally, they wanted to add, or they still have plans to add battery storage to the site and solar. So you can imagine getting all of these components working together and integrating everything. It's quite a challenge. And they know they need to be able to do this well, to bring everything together well, to be able to help promote and encourage the transition to electric transportation. And so we're really working with them on this tool that is vendor agnostic. So that gives customers choice and flexibility with the hardware and the vendors that they want to work with. That lets the utility open up programs to customers who do have specific vendors they want to work with. And it gives them, at the same time, they can choose who they want to work with and participate in these programs or rates that allows them to reduce their costs for charging and really maximize those TCO benefits that they're trying to achieve. And also, our tool, since we've built this kind of single dashboard for the utility to be able to see the chargers at their site, it gives customers who might be enrolled in these programs too the ability to view all of their chargers, maybe from multiple sites, if they're operating large fleets in the area, one single place where they can see all the info about their chargers too. So it's kind of a good, we're trying to work both with the utility and create good tools for the customer in the end too, and kind of a win-win there. All right, that's everything I wanted to share on the Portland project. We can go to the next slide to talk about the Xcel Energy Charging Perks pilot. This is a really super innovative pilot that Xcel Energy is investing in. It was a really fun one to work on. Worked with the product development team there on it, and this is an actively or an active managed charging pilot using the telematics on the vehicle itself. So what really differentiates this pilot from some of the other managed charging pilots that we've seen out there is it's working through the car rather than through the charging station that's mounted on a wall in a garage. So there's a lot of advantages with working through the vehicle itself, and other challenges that come with that too. But the idea is to make it super easy in this pilot. So ultimately, the idea is customers just come home, plug in their car, and that's it. That's all customers have to do to participate in the pilot. And behind the scenes, Xcel Energy and the customer's automaker, so they're working with Ford, GM, BMW, Honda, and Teslas can participate through another company called WeaveGrid, or they have a platform called EV Pulse. Those customers, the automakers then create a charging schedule and send that to the car to charge at the right time. So customers don't have to think about it at all, and their car smartly charges at the times that are best for the grid, and also make sure that the car is ready to go. So it's pretty dynamic. The automakers know how much charging that car needs ahead of time. So it's really trying to inconvenience customers as little as possible while making it, most beneficial for the grid. And Xcel is really trying to push the charging in. They have two different goals. One is to shift it to hours where there's just low demand overall. So that means, probably cheaper energy, hopefully less carbon intensive energy. And then also when there's excess renewable generation. So sometimes those wind turbines are going really hard up there in Wyoming, and there's more power than Xcel knows what to do with. So being able to turn on charging like Wesley's program in Hawaii is definitely an ideal thing to be able to use that carbon-free energy when it's abundantly available. So this is kind of a complicated pilot to work with multiple automakers all at the same time, and control the charging and get all of these cars working together in a smart way. So if we go to the next slide, I wanted to share a little bit about how it works. And this is pretty similar to that image with Portland General Electric and the solution that Panasonic is building over there. But essentially, Xcel is using this platform called Open Vehicle Grid Integration Platform. OVGIP is the term for it. And it's a central platform where all the automakers send their information to. Well, let's start from the top down. Xcel Energy sends information about the grid to OVGIP, and that gets distributed to all the automakers. And then, information about the vehicles comes back the same way. So it comes back from the automakers to OVGIP to Xcel Energy. So it's still a complicated system, but you can see it's a lot easier for utilities to be able to manage working with just one centralized, kind of aggregator type system. to be able to integrate and work with all these DERs out there. So I threw out a ton of information. Peter, I don't know if we want to do Q&A now or if we want to wait until after Jon gets a chance to share about his programs too. Kind of flexible either way, whatever you think is most beneficial.
Well, let's just have a couple of questions here. So why don't we go ahead and jump into them? First one here. What is Open ADR?
Open ADR. Okay, I didn't talk about Open ADR, but Open ADR is this a protocol that allows different DERs to be able to talk to each other. So it's a standardized, it's a way to standardize things, so it's a little easier to get things to work together rather than using these proprietary protocols where, essentially you have to speak this language to be able to communicate with these devices. And to be able to know what that language is, you have to pay a huge amount of money to some vendor. It kind of creates this lock-in. Whereas Open ADR is, the idea is to, it's to be more open and to have more flexibility to be able to control DERs. Hopefully that was an okay answer. I'm sure Jon did a better job than I did on that, but.
Okay, I'm in the EV Pulse pilot. It's gone pretty well thus far. Wish it would give me more feedback rather than just the last week.
That's interesting to hear. I definitely would recommend sending that info into Xcel Energy. That's awesome. You're part of it. I'm thrilled with how many people enrolled in that program. I think we had space for up to 600 customers. I think there's still space. So if you have an electric vehicle and it's a Tesla, Ford, GM, BMW, or Honda, definitely sign up. You get $100 just for signing up. It's an e-gift card. And then if you stay in for a year, you get another $100 gift card. So easy program to do. You're going to help Xcel learn about how to build these programs and some pretty good incentives there for you. So definitely though, email Xcel your feedback. That's helpful. I think it's just electricvehicles@xcelenergy.com, and I know it'll get to the right spot.
Okay. Philip, what does Xcel mean by quote unquote best for the grid?
There's a lot to that, I think. There's a lot of factors that go into it. And I will clarify again, I'm not speaking on behalf of Xcel Energy here. So I'll say what I think is best for the grid. How about that? But really, I think there's a few things. Like there's certainly the carbon intensity of energy generation and shifting flow to the times where there's low carbon intensive energy or carbon free energy, ideally. I think that's, a core component of that for the grid. But, if you're an electrical engineer, you're thinking about the stability of the grid and how to make sure the power doesn't go out. And that's a super critical thing. I mean, we saw that in Texas. People died when the power went out. And so utilities are very afraid of blackouts that occur when your load is higher than the generation. So if those don't match, the power starts to go off. And that's a serious issue. So I think that's the other component of when it's best for the grid, is trying to keep those peaks down so there's always enough generation for it. I think those are probably the main things. And ideally, I'll say one more thing. When we're looking at the loads and when we want it to, when we want load on the grid, ideally, if we could just have this flat line across the entire day of how much load or how much demand there is on the grid, that would be perfect. You know, we have machines that could run constant all the time and crank out that power. But that's just not real life. So ideally for the grid, we want the load to be pretty stable and pretty predictable to make sure that the power is reliable and the lights are always on. So.
Okay, got two more questions here. How much overhead is required for this program? Meaning what cost for running it will be passed on to ratepayers?
I assume they're talking about the charging perks pilot at Excel Energy. You know, I'm not sure I have a great answer to that one. It's part of their product development funding. So I think some of it comes from that. I'm not exactly sure how it's all structured there. Yeah, sorry, I don't have a great answer on that one.
Okay. Are vendors and or utilities coming up with a common metric to measure or value grid flexibility? And that might be an existential question we save for the end too.
It's a fantastic question, actually, and it's funny. We're talking to a few utilities about their electric transportation plans and their business strategy, and part of it is there aren't good mechanisms right now to value the load flexibility. So you know, what is it worth? And not only, you know, you could come up with a number, but we need something that's accepted by regulators and by everybody else, so that we make sure we're, you know, probably to the concern of the other question, we're not creating pilots or programs that are just raising the rates for folks. You know, we want to make sure they're cost beneficial. That's part of the system that we have, is these programs do have to produce more value than they're costing ratepayers. So I think there's a lot of work to be done on that. I know there's studies from various PUCs that are working on this. I know the Oregon PUC is hosting several workshops right now on that very specific topic. So I think there's a lot to be figured out on that front still. Definitely encourage folks to get engaged in that conversation with your local PUCs, because it's one we do need to sort out and make sure that we're valuing that in the right way.
Okay, sounds great. Well, appreciate it, Philip. Now we'll go ahead and hand it off to Jon.
Thanks, Pete. And Philip did a great job of kind of describing a little bit of sort of why we're talking about DERs and grid flexibility. I'm going to describe some things going on here at Fort Collins Utilities. So I'm the Energy Services Manager and also Policy Advisor for utilities. And we're really evolving from sort of demand response is now almost a legacy term. And as we look forward to grid management and grid flexibility. And I'm going to show a little bit of grounding, and then I'll go through a couple of projects and show some real data. Always love looking at real data. And one of the key things that I'd like to highlight is how you can use the same asset, customer asset, and utility systems to provide different benefit streams, oftentimes on the same day. So whether that's a customer rate benefit, a building sort of facility demand benefit, a system coincident peak benefit, system operations, or market benefits. Again, how do you take the same physical hardware and software systems and use those kind of simultaneously? Let's go to the next slide, Philip, or Pete, excuse me. I'm assuming Pete's going to send these out, so I'm not going to go over all the words on here. But if we really think about what are we trying to enable flexibility in our distributed energy resources, on one end, we've got a whole range of different customer devices, be that a vehicle, a thermostat, industrial loads. And then we have a set of system benefits on the other side, be that a customer benefit, distribution, utility, or at the generation and transmission sort of bulk system level. In between those is a whole bunch of different pieces of the puzzle, and there have been references to those throughout our speakers today with original equipment manufacturers or OEMs, and then the enabling systems that the utility has to have. And so to show a little sort of picture of some pieces of that, if you go to the next slide, you show kind of an ugly slide of, and this is actually a very simplified version of our Distributed Energy Resources Management System, or DERMS, architecture. So the DERMS really is that purple layer called IntelliSource, which is the platform that we use from our vendor. Above that, you have a different numbers of systems or roles or players. SCO is our operations center, PRPA is Platte River. Eventually, we'll be connecting our ADMS, or Advanced Distribution Management System. And then we have a number of different pathways to get to that end device. Some of those are through custom APIs or communication connections that are customized to a particular device. Some are native to the platform. Some use open protocols like Philip described with OpenADR and other commercial ones. So my point really here is that these are not simply plug and play. You have to understand the various pathways, starting from the end device all the way back up to how it can be controlled, and in some cases controlled in different layers, from a market environment to a generation to distribution authority, for example. So let's go to the next slide and pull out some examples of some different pilots and programs and projects we have going on. So the first one I want to talk about is, they're called grid integrated water heaters. On the left-hand side here, it shows actually that sort of snapshot of the communication path going from our DERM system through OpenADR, through another software platform called SkyCentrix, then through a Wi-Fi network of the customer or at the customer site, and then to a hardware platform called CTA 2045 to a water heater. These are traditional electric water heaters that normally operate with a sort of a deadband of sorts. But in this grid interactive one, we can turn it on within the deadband to sort of charge, store energy in the hot water. We can turn it off regardless of where we are outside the deadband to curtail load. And we can also manage it in terms of making sure that a customer doesn't run out of hot water. So there's a service benefit of this. So let's see how this works on a particularly complex day when we were trying to do everything at the same time. So go to the next slide. So let me orient you a little bit to the chart. This is data from a fleet of about 80 of these grid integrated water heaters. And the kind of brown line and the right-hand axis are the actual electrical load of that fleet. And the green line represents the storage capacity, lower at the bottom and higher as you go top. And then we were working on multiple strategies. One is to store energy at solar noon, so looking at excess renewables and being able to absorb that. And we also have a time of day or time of use peak period for the customer where we want to hold usage down. And then in order to sort of facilitate the value of there, we go through a kind of a preconditioning before each of those events. So we pre-cool, where you see the green line ramping up, and we turn the water heaters off so that we can store more energy in that peak solar time period. Then before the on-peak time of day period, we actually pre-warm the unit, it spikes up, and then you can see it recover back at the end of the period. Part of what we can start to learn through these is we've learned if you dispatch these water heaters at any time, you get about a kilowatt hour of storage. If you do a preconditioning, you can more than double that to get more than a kilowatt hour in each unit. And then we have similar information on the load shedding and load sort of ramping that we have. So again, an example of taking a single asset and using it for multiple purposes throughout the day. Next slide. So now I'm going to show an example of a commercial building, solar plus a battery. It's actually our utilities administration building, a couple years old. Modest size storage, 92 kilowatt hour battery and a 50 kW inverter. There's 100 kilowatts of solar on the roof. And the use cases in here are, you see listed there as demand limiting, solar storage, load shifting and demand response. What's not included on that list is a microgrid operations. We can get to that in the Q&A, why this particular facility wasn't set up for that kind of resilience or microgrid operations. But let's look at some data from these on the next slide. So this is a 24-hour period. And in this particular slide, we're first looking at just the battery operation. And red is charging and green is discharging. So starting in the morning, the battery's sitting there like a paperweight, and then we store solar over solar noon. Then the first green period is we're discharging the battery to reduce the system peak, coincident peak hour. So that's a benefit at the larger system. We're then charging the battery at low cost off-peak hours overnight. And then again, discharging the battery early in the morning to help the building's peak load. And we can kind of repeat this cycle. The system peak wouldn't necessarily happen every day, but the other ones could be on a daily scheduled cycle for that season, for that particular battery. If you go to the next slide, you see the same information, but the entire building. So you can see the building load without the solar, you can see the solar load, you can see the net load of the grid, and a lot of things happening, but it gives you an example of the dynamics of multiple things happening at the same time, with the load on the building changing, the solar varying, and then using the battery to fill gaps or to provide specific benefits here and there over time. Next slide. So if we come back next year, hopefully we can show some data of a similar system that we're currently installing at a recreation center in Fort Collins, that similar in scale, but it will be configured so it can be used as a microgrid with the solar and battery, so that the facility can be used as a resilience hub and an evacuation point in emergencies. In this one, we are testing both customer and utility benefits, and for the first time in our experience, we'll actually own the battery behind the meter, and so we're kind of modeling and, like I said, testing a number of different components. One of the project partners here is Agito, doing the microgrid control system, and I know Pete mentioned that Mike will be presenting at one of the next NCREST meetings coming up, so I'm sure that'll be a good one. Next slide. Now I'm going to shift in after this slide, show a couple of examples from our residential battery pilot program or demonstration program. This simply lays out some of our objectives, and you can see they range from technical to operational to policy and programmatic. And so the program itself is a simple incentive, and most of these we're seeing solar and batteries proposed to the customers. And we are monitoring them, but not actively controlling them. And if we get into the Q&A, I think sometimes I'm the odd one out. I think as utilities, we jump sometimes too quickly to the managed solution, and that we don't leverage enough the behavioral side of it, and that a combination of these will work best in the end. So let's take a look at a couple of data slides from these batteries. Next slide. Oh, there we go. There's a lot of lines on this chart. I'm going to highlight one of them, and then you can again absorb it later. So this is a 12-month period for a group, essentially a representative sample of residential customers. Here we have customers, standard customers with no solar or battery, customers with solar, and customers with solar plus a battery. And then you've got the energy that's delivered to the customer by the utility on the left-hand axis, and the percentage of that energy that's delivered during the peak hours that we have. So peak hours have been determined as a benefit that we see. When we see lower use, that's a benefit to the utility in the system. The takeaway here is the very bottom line. That is the battery customers, solar plus battery customers. And so they are needing less energy from the grid during on-peak hours across the entire year. And so they're leveraging their batteries in response to the time of day pricing without us doing anything at all. And they're providing a benefit to the entire system. So if we flip to the next slide, it's the same data, but this is energy that is pushed back from the customers onto the grid. And I would highlight the dashed line with the blue squares, which is the percentage of energy delivered to the grid during on-peak hours. And throughout most of the year, actually throughout the entire year, but especially in the summer months, those customers are pushing more energy back onto the grid when we need that energy, because that's the highest loads that we see. So again, passive approach using just behavior and the rate, and seeing exactly the results that we would like to see on a system level with a group of customers. Next slide. So I'm going to pivot to a new demonstration that we'll be recruiting for in a few months on electric vehicle charging. And Philip also talked about the power of using the telematics in the cars. And so we are working with companies called Rolling Energy Resources, and we'll be integrating this into our DERMS system. And you can see the suite of electric vehicle manufacturers they have on the right-hand side there. Hopefully you can read at least the logos there. Quite a few different models. We think at least 50% of the cars, EVs currently in Fort Collins, would be capable of working with this system. And essentially, these cars are now connected devices, just like a smart thermostat might be. And the power of sort of skipping the charging infrastructure itself is that then we don't care where these are plugged in or how they're plugged in or to what kind of charger, but we can work with through the cloud and the manufacturer's app and this Rolling Energy Resources app to optimize that for both customers and the utilities. So we're going to be in the demonstration working on all kinds of different use cases here, and excited to start rolling that out. So if you got an EV in Fort Collins service territory and you want to be part of this, get in touch with us. It'll be a few months before we're ready to start signing people up, but we think it'll be a great resource to learn more and more about how EVs, because they're very significant loads, as Philip mentioned, so how we can better manage them. So I got one more slide I want to leave you with. Go to the next one. As we look ahead, first looking on the left-hand side here, we're seeing a very strong preference to work with partners that can leverage and use open standards for the communication protocols. So OpenADR is one of those standards. We'll be expanding our capabilities into another standard called IEEE 2030.5. Sorry for all the gobbledygook in these acronyms. We're also looking at one called OCPP for commercial EVSE charging. And hopefully, if more of the manufacturers and OEMs start to use these open standards, it's going to simplify some of the complexity that exists here today and the costs that go along with this. And then I'll leave for last this sort of real data from the right-hand side of this chart. This is a couple of years old, but in the quote old days of demand response, the goal of the program was to call as few events as possible and make them as short as possible. And so the goal was like, let's, lower is always better. We are now in a situation where we're controlling with our variable pricing and controlling devices on behalf of customers. And then you have the other use cases of building demands, coincident system peak demands, system emergencies or operational requirements, and or markets where we're seeing an order of magnitude increase in the number of events. So it's like going from playing a piano with 2 fingers and playing chopsticks to playing Mozart or Beethoven, where you are continually playing chords as you're choosing what kind of devices are available at any given time, what's the capacity, should I precondition them, how long will they provide a benefit, and creating a landscape and optimization to do this kinds of work. So much more complex, but as we try to start to match the demand of the system to the increased variability in our renewable portfolios, we're going to need to do this kind of matching much more rigorously over time. So looks like we left a little time for questions, so I'll turn it back to you, Pete.
Great, well, thank you, John. Let's see, yeah, we got some questions lined up here. Okay, actually, I'm going to go back to an earlier one that is a really good question. I don't think it was exactly discussed here, but I think it's an excellent question. I learned on a trip to Germany that there are companies with a software solution that allows solar homes to become a network that performs voltage regulation on the grid by throttling loads. Does something similar exist in the US or Canada?
I can't speak to whether it exists or not, but one of the things I mentioned was that new standard that we're hoping to build into our capabilities next year, which is IEEE, which is the an industry association of electrical engineers. So IEEE 2030.5 is a communication structure that allows you to talk to inverters. So be that a solar inverter or a battery inverter. And that is where you can start to actually adjust, do voltage regulation, power factor correction, and things like that in real time. So we're probably a couple of years from now doing that ourselves. It sounds like it may be more advanced in other places. We also need to see our market environment evolve in Colorado before there's any sort of potential valuation to that kind of effort. So right now there's no mechanism to translate any value to that, but that also is changing in the next few years, and so we're hoping that that could become part of the another tune you could play on all of these assets. So
is that kind of equivalent? I know I've been hearing talk about, in general, smart inverters. Are those inverters adopting that standard, or is this even beyond what I guess would currently be considered a smart inverter?
The smart inverters that are available today are capable of adjusting for voltage and power factor and things like that. Most of them can be adjusted sort of in a fixed way rather than a dynamic way. So it's that dynamic management of that. So the inverter is capable of it. The rest of the communication and tools and things are not. And so we sometimes in our larger solar systems now will prescribe settings on those smart inverters based on a system impact study, for example, but it's not dynamically managed. So
okay,
but the inverters are there.
One step at a time, I guess.
Yeah.
If Fort Collins has residential time of use rates, which you do those rates incentivize use of power during periods of high renewables?
So we don't have that yet. So that was great to see Excel's pilot, and so I think right now our rates are based on sort of the wholesale price structures that we see, and so they're sort of beneficial on a statistical basis across the year, but not necessarily on today versus yesterday or tomorrow. But part of the reason we rolled out the time use rates was to introduce our customers to the fact that the price and value of electricity and eventually the content of that electricity varies by the hour of the day and the day of the week and the season of the year. And so habituating folks to be able to, understand and be able to manage that. So that's something I wouldn't be surprised if we're working on with Platte River in the coming years, but not ready yet. So.
Okay.
I'd say except for the local solar, we know solar production is highest at solar noon on clear days, and so we're starting to do some of the storage components of trying to store energy based on the availability of renewables, but only in that very limited kind of prescriptive way.
Okay. For building the PV battery use case, it looks like you chose to fully cycle the batteries twice a day. Are you concerned about the length of useful life you can get from the batteries given that pattern of usage?
It may have looked like a full cycle, but it's not. We've got some pretty comfortable boundaries in there for maximum charge and minimum. That was a particular day that was a good example of some real data, so I grabbed that. So, with this particular project, we'd love to learn how long the battery does last, and understand that. So it is a demonstration project. That's one where, it's okay to, within reason, to sort of push the boundaries a little bit. So.
Okay, if my EV charges off peak and dumps the battery into the grid on peak with vehicle to grid, what do I pay off peak to charge, and what do you pay on peak for power delivered, or what would you?
So that's, if we think of our current stationary battery program, that's exactly what we allow. So we don't put restrictions on when somebody is drawing from the grid or pushing back from the grid. And so I'm going to be hard pressed to remember the exact numbers of our on-peak and off-peak rates, but it's on the order of between 6 and 7 cents off-peak, and around 20 to 22 cents on-peak. So we actually ran, when we started rolling out the battery projects, some of our finance folks, well, wait a minute, aren't people going to charge it up at the low cost and then discharge it at the high cost? And I said, well, isn't that how we designed our time of day rate structure? And they said, yes. I said, well, that's exactly what we want them to do then. So, and we see some of our customers doing exactly that. So.
Okay, well, let me see here. Did I miss any questions? I think. Okay, any other questions for John or the rest of the gang? Oh, here we go. Given that batteries have finite lifetimes as determined by the number and depth of discharge cycles, how will utilities determine compensation to behind-the-meter battery system owners be determined for the accelerated aging their system will experience under control of the power utility that is using the battery system for load and supply management? How will the battery system owners compensation be determined? And I'm not sure if Jon Grooters wants to jump in on this one as well, because with that project.
I think that's what, from my perspective, some of these earlier programs and projects need to determine. So in our case, with our current project, it's mostly around sort of monitoring the battery and observing what's happening before we design those programs. Certainly, the more you use them, the quicker they wear out, and yet we're sort of in the first generation of these as well to understand what that value proposition might look like. So I know, John, you might have more experience with your programs on where we're trying to get with that. So.
Yeah, I don't think that you can I think you really just need to work with the parameters. You need to make sure that you don't bring them below a certain state of charge. Obviously, when you do like a deep discharge, that really lessens the lifespan. And then also, again, all these programs have have specific, we can only control it. Now the New England program, it's up to 60 times during the summer, so it is a substantial amount. Other programs are, much less than that. So certainly something that needs to be considered, and probably look at like the life cycles and see what, make sure that it isn't cost prohibitive for the end customer to allow that.
I think part of our responsibility is to be really transparent about that. Here's exactly what the parameters are, and then customers can. That puts a lot of burden on some customers maybe to try to figure that out, but maybe eventually we'll be able to help them do that and understand the battery dynamics over time.
And I would expand that, as we alluded to talking about vehicle to grid and managed vehicle charging, same type of, if you're actually discharging that vehicle, that certainly will be something that, has to be considered.
Okay, as DERs proliferate, will Fort Collins Utilities move to a virtual power plant control platform?
I don't know yet. It's evolving pretty quickly. We're working really closely with Platte River and the other cities on this, and trying to understand sort of where the levels of management and control best reside on this. I would say the virtual power plant kinds of activities are going to not happen until we are in a full market environment, because that's where the value streams are. And so that's a couple years out. I think we're doing is building the capabilities and tools to be ready for that, with the different assets that we're having and with our systems that we have, sort of foundational systems we have, whether that's a DERMS or our advanced distribution management system, using our fiber for some of our backbone communications, things like that sort of enable us to be ready for that time when it comes.
Okay. Do you foresee a future when U.S. homeowners with renewable generation will be a host site for the power company to install and maintain their own battery equipment? I haven't bought my own battery. I'm waiting for them to, or I haven't bought my own battery. I'm waiting for them to install it on my site and use my solar to charge it. I thought Green Mountain Power did something to this effect.
Green Mountain Power has. There's probably some other pilots around the country that have done that. So we're experimenting with us owning the battery behind that commercial project at the Northside Aslan Center. Platte River's doing some battery projects with their large new utility scale, and it's interesting that this batteries don't have the same scaling cost benefits at this point that we see in a lot of other products like solar. A small solar system versus a very large one, the economics are very different. Batteries don't seem to have that same, so it's intriguing to think about where batteries are best located, whether it's on the distribution system, behind the meter at a customer location, or up at the transmission level. And probably the answer is eventually going to be all of the above for various purposes. But John, you're coming on too.
I was just going to mention another, Green Mountain Power is certainly one. We are seeing more utilities looking at owning behind the meter storage. I would also, Holy Cross Energy up in the mountains of Colorado, cooperative, they're doing a pretty unique program where they are owning it. It's customer owned, but they are financing it through a 10-year finance, no interest finance. And then it's also then they also provide incentive payments for use of the battery as well. So there is going to be a lot of new ways to get battery storage out. Especially we're seeing a lot more programs for like low and medium incomes and how to how to be able to provide battery storage and resiliency to those.
There's the next question. Are members or other members of PRPA, I guess the other member cities, resistant to these programs?
I would not characterize them as resistant. So we worked closely together to put together a sort of a DER. It's called the strategic plan. It's a pretty straightforward sort of how we work together kind of document. And got some active working groups together. Not all the cities have some of that foundational infrastructure, be that AMI or which doesn't have to be AMI, but they're all in different places. But I'd say I don't think any of them are resistant to it. But we're not starting from the same place either. So.
Yeah, I think Fort Collins has definitely been a little bit more on the leading edge, and probably having CSU here and maybe Wade and some good folks who are into a little bit more into getting into the future.
Yeah, we've been operating in a different policy environment and utility environment for quite a few years. So.
Okay, one more question. Has Fort Collins University, no, FCU considered a transactive grid that would allow a solar owner to sell power to his neighbor?
I might argue that's basically how it works now. So we are, although the neighbor isn't transacting, we're the go-between. So about if I remember the numbers right, somewhere close to 55% of the solar from residential rooftops throughout the year is exported, not self-consumed within the house. That solar is purchased by us at close to the retail rate, and then is sold to somebody else through that same retail rate structure. So we are the in-between in that. And so it's not exactly the sort of peer-to-peer transaction that the question was, but it's kind of how it works today. So.
Okay, I was sent an article about apparently Pacific Northwest National Laboratory did a transactive energy study, and I kind of scanned it, but it's something I'm going to look into possibly if it'll make a good webinar. The beauty about webinars is, you can have people from all over. Any other questions? I'll give it a second here before closing out early.
Can I ask John one real quick? Did I say Nissan was in your pilot with Rolling Rock?
Yes, they are. So
awesome. That's a huge one. There's a lot of Leafs around town. So
there's a lot of Leafs. Yeah, I think it's still predominantly Leaf and Tesla, but then the others are catching up. But
perfect. That's awesome. Thanks. Thanks for letting me interrupt.
No worries. Well, I think we've reached the end. John, I want to thank you, Philip and John and Wesley, who I think signed off because he's on East Coast time, but having to still at work in California. But I want to thank everyone for joining. If you want a copy of the slides, you can just email the info@cress-energy.org. That email comes to me, and I'll be able to get you that. I can send you a link to the recording. I have to double check with everyone if we're okay in putting this out on YouTube, but if everyone's okay with that, we'll get it edited and up in a couple weeks. But you will get the link to the recorded session if you want to rewatch it or share it with people. Hey, I want to thank everyone again, and have a great evening, and hopefully we'll see you all at the Innisphere on the 26th to talk about the Azalon Center project. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.